able to save my sight and remove that piece of metal. So I am not standing here to badmouth the medical profession. I'm standing here in gratitude for what they do that is useful, but encouraging you to observe and consider and evaluate what they do that may not serve you as well. The medical model, for one thing, encourage us to believe that it's nothing to do with your health, your diet, I should say, your lifestyle, as to what health experience you have. It's purely down to fate. Or somebody up there pointed at you and said, Jeremy, it's Tuesday, it's your day for a heart attack. And that apparently all of us just wander around hoping that the finger isn't going to be pointed at us next. And if it is, we go to the medical profession and they say, oh, I am so sorry, this is most unfortunate. It's not fortunate, it's cause and effect, but we're not taught to see it that way. We are taught to see it, that it's purely fate and it's unfortunate. And beyond that, they will take responsibility on our behalf. Not only will they take responsibility on our behalf, but they will only focus on the one part of our organism that is challenging, that is expressing symptoms. If there's something wrong with your liver, they're not going to start asking you about what's going on in your head or your right leg or any other part of your psychology or physiology. They're going to focus just on that one place in your body. And when they focus on it, what they're searching to do is to cut, really, the cables of communication that allow your body to express itself. I know that sometimes I have been known to drive just a little recklessly when in extreme hurry. And I did hear of something rather amusing, whereby somebody was driving along a motorway in a car and a red light flashed. And the passenger said, well, really, shouldn't we pull over? Shouldn't we pull over? And the driver said, yeah, I guess we should. So they pulled over. And the driver got out and lifted up what I call the bonnet. I think you call it the hood, right? We wear hoods on our heads. It's all very confusing. Anyway, they lifted up the bonnet and took out some clippers and they clipped the wire. And they got back and drove up the motorway. They said, problem solved. Well, understandably, the passenger was a bit perturbed. Cutting the wire to communication does not deal with the issue. It literally just removes that communication, and that is what the medical model do. They do not have a reverence or appreciation of the body's ability to heal and repair itself. Instead, they perceive that you are either suffering from an organ excess or a drug deficiency. Neither of which, in my evaluation, kind of makes any sense. So once we subscribe to the medical model, we find ourselves disempowered. We find ourselves at the victims of fate, and we find ourselves in a position whereby we are being poisoned or in some way cut into in order to create health. It just doesn't make sense. Then, of course, there's the other window. This is the alternative or complementary therapies. Now, there's certain words within this group that go down really well. The word organic. If it's organic, you can't go wrong. Well, I would just like to point out that belladonna organic is possible to obtain. I wouldn't recommend you consumed it. You wouldn't do awfully well. The other word that seems to go down well is the word natural. And yet, ironically enough, there's so little that's natural about what they do. Again, there is no reverence or respect or even intelligent understanding of your body's innate ability to create its own health. It is perceived that we have to do things to that body, whether it's injecting things into it in the terms of needles, acupuncture, whether it's in terms of Bach flower remedies, whether it's in terms of homeopathy or any other modality whereby we are saying the body is incapable of sorting itself out, we must do something to it. And in nearly every case, what we're aiming to do is cut the cable of the body's communication. Symptoms are our greatest friends. They enable us to listen to our body. They enable us to live inside our bodies in a state of awareness, the sort of awareness that Dana was speaking about this morning so beautifully. If we're cutting off our symptoms, we're cutting off our awareness. Of course, the other window is the natural hygiene window. That beautiful window that differs from the others, because the others, when you look through them, you see black and white. And when you look through the hygiene window, you see color. You see full color. And the reason you can see full color is because you can see thought and you can see feeling. And that is what makes it colorful. That is what life is about. That is the essence of life. It's feeling and being alive and having the ability to think independently. That is what living is about. That is why hygiene is about living. It's about being alive. It's about being vibrant. It's about leaving black and white behind and stepping into the light of the whole spectrum of colors that make up life. This is what hygiene is about. If we look through either of the other windows and we decide to allow ourselves to be indoctrinated by the collective dictation, we're living black and white lives, and we are also not present. As Dana was talking about, we're not here, we are not present, we're not aware. And we start to have a rather fatalistic attitude towards life. There was one quote I found that I feel really illustrated this well and certainly brought a smile to my face as I read it. This was by Brendan Behan. And the quote is this: "I was court-martialed in my absence and sentenced to death in my absence. So I said they could shoot me in my absence." If we're not present, we're absent. What enables us to truly think and truly feel? Well, one thing we know on a physiological level is we need to be able to get oxygen around our bodies. This is absolutely paramount to being able to be fully alive. Have you ever heard that in order to think clearly and cognitively, we need to get oxygen to our brain cells? Is this news? We all know this, right? If you have oxygen deprivation to your brain, you become rather cloudy in your thinking and, quite frankly, slightly silly. You need to get oxygen to your brain. It's vital. In addition to that, if we're looking at human potential of actually living a full color life, which includes the ability to physically move, we need to get oxygen to our working muscles, do we not? If we want to participate in any exercise that's of any significant duration, we have to be able to deliver oxygen to the muscles of our bodies. And some of you may also be familiar with the fact that in order for our cells to remain healthy, they need oxygen. If they don't have oxygen, they won't thrive. But there's one thing that thrives really well where there's no oxygen: cancer. Cancer thrives in what we call an anaerobic environment, which means where there is a deficit of oxygen. So we know for 3 reasons, as far as health is concerned and human potential is concerned, we want to get that oxygen in. We want to get oxygen to our brain, to our cells, to our muscles, so that we can be fully alive and not have our cells going AWOL. What can prevent that? Well, I'd like to tell you a little story first of all, and it's a fairy story. So at this point, you can really sit back and sort of nestle down like you would. Think back to when you were a child and somebody told you a bedtime story. We're going to do story time now. Are you sitting comfortably? Or relatively? The story goes like this, and it's a magical fairy tale story. I'm sure that many of you are keen and enthusiastic to read adventure stories. Would I be right? Yeah, you like adventure stories. How many of you here like romances? Anybody want to raise their hand? And go on, be proud of romance. It's okay, you know. No one's going to say sissy. It's okay. You can be proud of it and enjoy romances, right? Well, let me tell you this. Next time you go to the bookstore, you don't need to go to the adventure books or the romantic books and the novels. You go straight to the physiology department, because those books contain more adventure stories and more romance than you could ever digest in a month. They're wonderful. And one of those stories I'm going to share with you right now. The first character in the story is a character by the name of Princess Oxygen. And Princess Oxygen is there floating around in the atmosphere doing her regal thing, when lo and behold, suddenly she gets sucked either down these two little holes here or this big hole here. And she tumbles down this passageway. You remember when Alice in Wonderland fell down the tunnel? Well, this is kind of similar. This is Princess Oxygen tumbling down this tunnel. And she ends up sitting in this transparent bubble. I mean, you've got to use your imagination a bit here, okay? So here she is in this transparent bubble. Her crown is a little lopsided. She fell a long way, but she's pretty much okay. She's arrived in one piece. And she sits in this transparent bubble. And she looks out through it and she sees the adventure wonderland of the inside of the human body. And there's mountains and valleys and lakes and flowers and trees and creatures and all sorts of exciting things going on. And she sits there in her transparent bubble and notices that there is a network of red brick roads, bless you. A network of red brick roads. You've heard of the yellow brick road. You know the Wizard of Oz? Yeah? These are the red brick roads. Actually called capillaries. Except if you're British, then they're called capillaries. But we're going to call them red brick roads. So there she is sitting in this transparent bubble, which is actually the alveolus of your lung, but we're calling it a transparent bubble. And who should she see come galloping down this red brick road but this gorgeous knight in shining armor on this wonderful white stallion horse? And she looks out and she sees him there and she looks and she goes, wouldn't mind a bit of that, as princesses do. So she sort of, smartens herself up a little bit and prepares herself and she permeates through the transparent bubble of the alveolus. And she bursts through into the capillary. And she jumps on the back of his horse and she puts her arms around his waist. And they gallop off into the sunset and he delivers her to wherever she's needed in that internal world. Now, to give you a clue, the horse's name is actually Red Blood Cell. I mean, you've heard of Red Rum, the racehorse. Well, this is Red Blood Cell. And the knight in shining armor, who knows his name? Hemoglobin is his name. Hemoglobin. And the only reason we're able to get oxygen into our bloodstream is because Princess Oxygen falls in love with hemoglobin. It's so romantic. However, what we need are certain things to enable us within our bodies to make hemoglobin and to make red blood cells. Now, I'd like to bring on the subject of protein. Proteins are made up of bricks we call amino acids. If you think of a house made up of bricks, amino acids are the bricks that house is made of. And what we do is we use those bricks for many different purposes inside our body. In fact, although there's only just over 20 of them, we can make 100,000 different types of houses, protein buildings inside our own bodies, just by putting them in different combinations and putting together in different ways. Now, interestingly enough, there is two of these bricks, two of these amino acids that we need in order to make our knight in shining armor hemoglobin and the horse, red blood cell. We need cysteine to manufacture red blood cells, and we need methionine to enable us to manufacture hemoglobin. Now, something interesting occurs, though, when we subject proteins to heat, when we cook proteins. What actually happens is that the sulfur component of both cysteine and methionine is broken away, which means they are now crippled and damaged amino acids, which means that our ability to create hemoglobin or red blood cells is also crippled and damaged. As soon as we heat proteins, we make it very, very difficult for our body to create hemoglobin and red blood cells. We have damaged the very things that they are made out of. Now, this is a tragedy because you know what that means. It means that Princess Oxygen arrives in her transparent bubble, And she sits there, and she sits there, and her little bottom lip begins to quiver. She looks at her watch, and she says, "He stood me up." Because when we don't have the ability to make the knight in shining armor or the horse, they don't show up. It's a bit like in England waiting for a bus out in the country where I live. We have a bus about every 3 days. It doesn't go where you want to go, and it will refuse to bring you home again. So next time you're thinking, gosh, shall I go salad or shall I go pizza? Just remember the romance and choose the salad. There is another interesting aspect of this, in fact, that the sulfur that is broken away from these 2 amino acids is one of our body's primary disinfecting agents. And also, when it's broken away from those original places where it belongs, the body is crippled in its ability to utilize it. So by heating proteins, not only do we seriously reduce our ability to get oxygen around our bodies, but we also seriously predispose ourselves to being unable to keep our bodies properly disinfected and clean. Our other disinfectant, by the way, is the sunlight. Sunlight cleans us the way that nothing else can.